I've had the benefit of seeing some of the photos when Stu sent them through, and there are some stunning ones. So we're in for a good night, I'm sure. But really like to just welcome you all here. We're also live on YouTube, so if there are anybody watching on YouTube, very welcome to join us and good to have you with us. And you can post questions on YouTube as well, which we'll pick up at the end if you wish to. But really, it's just over to Stuart. Stuart McAleese is one of the senior guides at Glenmore Lodge, hugely experienced, really enthusiastic, full of energy, full of vigour. I built him up to make it...
I'm very enthusiastic. I was like, the rest of it.
He'd rather be at home watching Wales play football.
Netflix.
No, it's great that you've come along tonight and being persuaded to come and share your exploits with us. As I say, having had a glimpse at the photos, we're in for some treats in terms of the exploits that you've done in various parts of the world. So I won't delay things any longer. I just hand over. Thank you ever so much for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Right, very elite audience. So, and I'm wearing a wire as well. Oh, I think I've got to press mute off it. Can you hear me?
You're not by the wire. Unmute yourself. Yeah, you're probably still on mute.
So I am officially wearing a wire now. So. Got to watch what I say. Yeah, and I realise also there's some really experienced climbers and mountaineers in the audience as well. Some of you may have well been to these places, so it might be nice for you all looking back on some photos. I can remember my dad was in one of the audience for one of my talks, and I kind of afterwards I was like, "Oh, Dad, what did you think?" He was like, "Oh, it looked easy." I was like, oh, okay. So that was a fairly normal response. But no, the talk tonight is about, I guess, looking back on some expeditions. You know, in my 20s and 30s, I was really lucky to be able to go on lots of expeditions around the world. I should probably thank my sponsors because I was part of it. Barclaycard. You meant to laugh. That was a joke. No, you know, a lot of it was kind of not possible without funding. You know, there are quite a lot of grants out there, the Mount Everest Foundation and the BMC. You know, without things like that, these expeditions and exploring just wouldn't be possible. But leading up to something like this, we're going to look. So this is what a lot of the talk is about, and I'm going to have some slides in there from Alaska and Patagonia as well. It's because kind of like you don't just decide you want to go to Baffin Island and climb a big wall without having done some things before. So there's a little bit of some climbing with friends as well. But I guess I don't want to put you off either as well, because there's going to be quite a lot of looking, you know, quite steep looking photographs, but these are all just adventures. I think there's many kinds of different adventures that you all can have in places like this. And I'm always interested to hear about wherever anybody's been. Like I think Mike's off to Peru in a little while as well. You know, so it's great hearing about other people's adventures as well. I can remember on one of these slides, we did a route in Alaska, and I was down in Patagonia. I think it was in 2002, and this was I was pretty young at the time. I got this email, which was quite nice, in Patagonia, saying that we'd been nominated for the PLA d'Or for a route that we'd done in Alaska. And this is a big French like award for mountaineering routes. They celebrate, you know, some routes, 5 or 6 different routes around the world every year. So I was like, we didn't really know anything about it. I especially didn't know anything about it. I thought it was a bottle of wine. But like in 2003, I think, you know, this is quite an elite audience. And at the same time, in 2003, I think I was on a stage in Grenoble talking about our route. And it was in front of like 500 French people. And I was quite nervous, as I am a little bit now as well. But so then, you know, I really didn't know what to do. And there was this translator on the side of the stage just before I got up. He was from Manchester. So I was like, I was chatting to him. And I thought I'd be quite clever and break the ice a little bit. So I got onto the microphone, and it was my turn to talk about our route. to 500 French people and how great it was. And I think after us was the premiere of Touching the Void in France. So there's me, like, I'm a bit intimidated by all that. So I kind of try to break the ice, and I go, bonsoir. And the translator goes, good evening. and fortunately, everybody did laugh at that stage, and that did help. Yeah. But anyway, when I was younger, I should maybe go back to this slide, because this talk is going to involve a bit of crawling. And I think us Brits, we like to see other people suffering, especially in the mountains, and not doing so well. So, I'm fairly average at most things, and that's probably why it took us so long to climb up this route. But it did involve a bit of an epic getting out, which involved a bit of crawling. So I'm going to talk to you about that later on at the end, and dodging polar bears. Yeah. But yeah, my friend convinced he caught me at a very good moment, actually, because he showed me this photo, and he says, "Oh, we should go and climb this wall. It's not been climbed before." And I'd done quite a few expeditions by then, and I realized how much effort they took and time, and I was a little bit, I'm not sure. And I looked at it and was like, right, how long do you reckon it would take? And you're going to see some people in this show, and they're all heroes and legends and great people. So if you ever meet them, say we saw you in a slideshow, and they'll buy you a beer and they'll tell you about loads of climbing, and a lot of them have been real big role models for me and mentors as well. But this guy, he said 10 days max. 10 days, yeah. Bit of mixed climb at the bottom, bit of mixed climb at the top, but I reckon 10 days on the wall. And I was like, oh, go on then. Yeah. But in the end, it took us 23 days on this wall, this pillar here in the middle, and then up there. So yeah, we'll talk about that later on. But that was about 1,200 meters of climbing. Yeah, so got that to look forward to. But yeah, when I was younger, my dad said, this is my little boy, by the way, Elliot. So hopefully he's watching this. I think he is. Anyway, this is my little boy, Elliot. And when my dad was younger, he did instill a bit of adventure spirit in me and what we did. But his a bit of advice was get a bike and ride around the world. I didn't do that, but I went climbing around the world instead. Yeah, but maybe Elliot might ride around the world. I don't know. So he did promote that kind of go out there and see it and have a great time. This is a good friend, Twid Turner. He can perform miracles. So we're on the north face of the Eiger a long time ago. And this was pre-Facebook. And we didn't have any information on it. And we were on it for quite a while. Like three days on the North Face route, and I can remember on our second bivouac on the Traverse of the Gods, we'd run out of gas, so we were in winter and we were melting snow for water. And at that point, I was like signed into the test, and I was like, well, we'll be all right. I'll just carry on. We'll be fine. But we were going to do another bivvy as well, so we were still 2 days to go. So it was a bit of a challenge. But as we were digging out our snow ledge on this tiny area to sleep on, Twid hit something metal. And I was like, what was that? So he kept on digging it out, because I was right next to him. And then I'm not joking, but the biggest Coleman gas cylinder you have ever seen, he just pulled it out of the snow like this. And it was almost like, oh, we were there and we were squinting at it. What is it? And there's like, no way. And I was like, well, and ever the positivity, I was like, oh, I'll be empty. And he shook it and it was full. And I was like, no, it won't fit our stove. And it fitted the stove. And I was like, wow. So anyway, I was like, wow, get that brew on. And then we could hear this Swiss team coming up behind us. At which point, Twid was like, quickly hide it. And I was like, what? What? And I was like, you think they've left this here and coming back for it? I was like, get that brew on. So yeah. And this is a little shot of on a route where we didn't get to the top actually. This is on Changabang in the Himalayas. In fact, actually recently this route, this is the Boardman Tasker route on the Shining Pillar. And we were trying the second ascent, and that had been done in 1975, I think, or 1974 by Pete Boardman and Joe Tasker. We had a rough time on this mountain. As I put it, we tried really hard, but didn't get really very far. Yeah. You can see our little tent here on the ridge. Yeah. So we were there above 6,000 meters for about, I can't remember now, 6 days, 7 days, just keeping on trying. And actually the Kiwis team recently did this route this year. So they got the second ascent of the route, which is pretty amazing place to be, and quite groundbreaking route when they did it back in 1974, 1975. Yeah. But this trip, this expedition really for me, because Patagonia was a bit different. You go to a hostel and you've got Wi-Fi connection. And for me, that's where like the difference between expedition and trip, I really found out about that, because I did lots of expeditions. And the difference between what I came up with, the difference between when somebody says, we're going away on a trip, and then we're going away on an expedition. And for me, a difference between a trip, you're likely to be in a hostel or somewhere with Wi-Fi connection. Yeah, an expedition, you're likely to spill your wee bottle at some point. Yeah, or spend a night in your own wee. And on Changabang, that's what I did. So we were given these sleeping pills to experiment with in this tiny village in Joshimath. I don't know if you've ever been. And behind this little caged door, this hatch, we were allowed to look at these different colored pills. And we were told that sleeping pills were really important. We were like, right, okay, well, I'll have those pink ones. So we were given different options. And then one night I can remember, I was struggling to sleep. So I kind of like took a few and then spilt my wee bottle, and I was like, yeah, this is an expedition now. Yeah. And this is Mark. Mark's so it was Twid, myself, and Mark with a team of three in Baffin Island. Mark's total really strong person, and I can remember when we were pretty low on Baffin and we were having to drag our gear out, which involved crawling. Mark just picked us all up and just carried us along, all our kit, and that's in Greenland. So Mark was experienced in Greenland. So he was in charge of the gun. Yeah. And this is Alaska. So we're going back now. So I started out my expeditions in Alaska, and I didn't really know how to big wall. And I think Twid's advice, or aid climbing, I think Twid's advice was something like, well, it's just like climbing at Gogarth. I was like, okay, you just put gear in and, you fall off every now and again, then put some more gear in and keep going. I was like, okay. And you kind of get a plane into the glacier in Alaska. And I can remember the very first time we went there, we kind of thought, we heard this rumor that you could take as much as you wanted. And I was like, great. And both of us were convinced that we could do that. So we over the first certain few days, you kind of end up at this little village called Talkeetna, which is an airstrip. And it's got this famous car sticker, something like a drinking village with a climbing problem. Yeah. So we were there for a few days waiting for good weather to get into Kachatnas. And we just had this neatly organized pile of kit. And we were like, wow, we can actually go in with this. And then the pilot came out after like 3 days of us packing. And he said to me, right, well, that's a lot of kit. It's going to cost you, don't you? And we were like, what? Nobody told us about that. He's like, yeah. So here's the formula. It's going to cost you per kilo. So we spent the next day trimming it all down and slimming it down to what we could afford. But on the flight in, I can remember getting in, and I had this. I don't know if you've ever had one of these horrific moments where you've forgotten to turn the heating off or the gas off in the house. But on the way in, which was an 1.5-hour flight to this really remote range, I'd thought that I'd left my sleeping bag. And so for the entire flight, I was kind of awkwardly uncomfortable because I was convinced that I didn't have my sleeping bag. And I was going into this area for 5 weeks without a sleeping bag. But I convinced myself I was going to be all right because I thought about how much clothes I had and the fact I could probably sleep in everything and I'll probably be okay. And we're going to be in a portaledge, so I'll be nice and, close to somebody else. So I'll be fine. Anyway, when we landed on the glacier and I got all my equipment out, life was very good when I saw my sleeping bag. I was like, oh my God, I could do anything now. That's it. Just a nice little shot. You can see some portaledges up here. Yeah, so the route we did a route on this east face of the citadel as well the year before. And when we were there, we noticed this gully here. So we went back and did the gully that year as well. And that's what the PLA d'Or nomination was for, this thin gully. But this was a Polish team. And I can remember being on the glacier when they came down after they did their route and we did ours. But we were quite intimidated by them because they were beasts. They'd been on that wall for ages and it had been bad weather. And then they came down. And I can remember sitting on them next to on the glacier. We were by, in our base camps. And they were really interested about what we were going to call our route. Now, while we were climbing this one, I just watched Madam Butterfly randomly on TV. But there were a load of butterflies whilst on belays in the route. So I was thinking about, maybe we could call this route Madam Butterfly. I thought it's quite quirky and quite cool. Anyway, the Polish came up to us and one of the first things they said was, right, what are you going to call your route? Because we're going to call ours Last Cry of the Butterfly. And I was like, no, you can't do that. But they said it in such a positive, a strong, positive, convincing way that they got Last Cry of the Butterfly. So they obviously saw lots of butterflies as well, which was quite a cool story. Yeah. So where their portaledges were around about here, and we climbed this gully here. Basically a bit like 0.5, but for 1,000 meters. Yeah, it's pretty cool. We ended up calling it the Super Duper Couloir. Well, that was Twid decided to call it that. But for most of the way, you could touch both sides with your hands, and it was almost vertical. So by the time it took us a couple of days to climb it, and by the time we were near the top, you could look down the entire gully. It was really, really cool. That trip, and this is quite an old photo, and we nicknamed some of the sections. So this section here, I had to squeeze through. I left my rucksack on an ice screw here and squeezed through this bit. Literally, it was pulling my harness off climbing through. So we nicknamed that pitch No Hips Pitch. Yeah. Yeah, and these were some of the doubtful sections on the route that we could see from the glacier below because our binoculars couldn't see right the way in. So they really unlocked the rest of the route. Yeah. And that was the breakfast pitch. So we bivouacked beneath that, and that was the first pitch of the next day. That was the wake-up call. And this is a different climb. So this was the year after we went back. And this route we ended up calling Perfect Storm because we were in this random storm for about 10 days on the This again, it was about 1,000 meters in this area where we are. They kind of nickname it like the Patagonia of Alaska. So there's lots of big walls, and this was quite a memorable night. Like that slide on the left. I can remember in about an hour's time, we were just going to crawl into our sleeping bags and hope the snow stops on a tiny ledge. But yeah, it was quite frantic. But a lot of the climbing was like that. And this is Di Lampard. He's a really impressive climber and vet from North Wales. And there was one really cool moment. I like his jacket. You know, we were sponsored at the time and we got really brand new kit, but he insisted on taking his jacket held together by gaffer tape. I don't know if you can see. We had all this new kit, but he pulled out his favorite jacket. And I can remember on one pitch, he's just hard as nails. Like there was lots going on. It was snowing. And we said, Di, are you okay for the next pitch? He said, yeah, fine. So to lighten his load, lighten whatever he had, he was passing gear to me. And we're halfway up this wall where if you ever drop anything, it's going to be the end of the trip. And he was just throwing kit to me, not very, worried about anything. And I was like, yeah, got it, put it in there. And then as if the world stood still, right, and everything stopped, he unzipped this pocket and he turned around to me, handed me his papers and baccy. And he said, whatever you do not drop this. And everything was all wet and damp, but his papers and baccy was in this immaculate, like waterproof case. And it was some good admin going on there. But I felt like if I did drop them, he would kill me. Yeah. And that trip, we were in there on our own for a good 20 days. And we did a new route on the east face of Mount Nevermore. Yeah, and that was perfect storm. And we saw no one. And on the way down, we unzipped the tent, the base camp tent, to get back in. And there was sort of like a pack of beers. And we still today do not know where they came from. Yeah, and that was really, really cool. Yeah, really cool. That's Twid on the top. Peak in the background is Kachatna Spire. So this is Patagonia now. So we're just kind of like getting a little bit of other routes before Baffin. The Alpinist magazine claimed this to be, I think it was Alpinist magazine, I've got to be careful, I've got a wire on. They claimed this to be one of the last great challenges, unclimbed challenges in the world. This is the south face of the South Tower of Piney in Patagonia. That's Central Tower of Piney. I don't know if you've ever been, but it's gobsmacking view of the Torres del Paine. Yeah, it's stunning. So that still is unclimbed, this face here, all of this. So we went to go and try on a trip. Pulled around this corner, and it is as impressive as it looks, and quite intimidating as it looks. And we thought we could climb this feature here. We didn't know what that feature was. But as we got closer, it worked out it was a very flush, featureless dike. So a section of rock vein that had just gone straight through the mountain. We hoped that would have a crack in it, but it didn't. And I can remember us doing a bit of recceing. So we walked backward and forward across the bottom of that wall looking for a route. What we were looking for was a crack or some sort of feature to climb, but it was blank. And maybe one day, people might find a way. But we were forced round onto the arete. And we were doing some ferries. And I can remember this is a long way up the route now. So we managed to climb a new route on that face, but further around the corner. We called this I think it was the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah. Again, around about 10 days and about 1,000 meters of climbing as well. it was, I had this one moment because we use fixed ropes to link each section. And there's a lot going on these belays. And actually one day dropped my Jumar. And that's a thing that slides up the rope. So that helps you ascend the rope. And I was like, oh, I just like literally watched it. You know how you just look at it and think, please stop, please stop. And it just went the whole way. And at that point, I was abseiling back down the ropes. And some of these ropes were in space, you know, overhanging ropes through sections. And I had a very sleepless night because my friend was like, oh, you'll be all right. You can prusik, or, you know, you can, you'll think of something. And I was like, what? And the next day I was convinced. I was like, right, I'm going to go for a look. Now, all of our ropes and equipment were on the mountain. We had no ropes, and we had this route going to and from the mountain from our advanced base camp. And I went out and I walked to underneath the base of this wall. Half of this wall is about it's 1,000 meters high. It's like El Cap. So I'm wandering around the bottom of El Cap looking for a Jumar, right? And then found it. Right. So I got it and I walked back, and I was walking back along this glacier to Twid, and I saw him and I was like, Twid, I found it. And just as I did that, I disappeared into a crevasse. Right. So I just like, and my hands went out like that. I was like, ooh. So Twid noticed me just drop out of sight, and I couldn't move. And underneath my feet were just dangling like that. Now, this is highly unprofessional, you know, walking around on a glacier without ropes. But all of our ropes were needed on the wall. And we were convinced there wasn't that big a problem. Anyway, so Twid was like, quickly, commando crawled up to me on the glacier, you know, on his belly up to me. And he threw out a sling. And I pulled myself back out. And I was like, I've got it. I've got my Jumar. And he was like, oh my God. And, you know, both of us were like a bit, right, this is pretty intense. We've got some crevasses around here. So we made things up. We linked whatever rack we had, like hexes, quick draws, and we improvised some glacial travel technique to get to the mountain and back. So it was pretty exciting. Yeah, I can remember that was a pretty tough wall, that. And our route was on the arête. So I fell into the crevasse about here, and our route went up here, and then out onto the face around about there. Yeah. I can remember there's a section about here. It was all kicking off. It was all going a bit wild, and you could still aid climb in a bit of a storm. And it was pretty memorable. I don't know if you've aid climbed much, but there was snow and ice in some of the cracks. And I had this horrific moment where aid climbing is really, really slow until you fall off. Yeah, it's really slow, very mechanical. And I was up as high as I could, and I could see easy ground. I could see a good piece of gear. And what I was on was something really marginal. And I knew that because it's quite a flared crack, and it wouldn't really hold the cam. And I'd been on this pitch for a couple of hours, you know, and Twid looked down the bottom was miles away, you know, so I'm still up there in the middle of nowhere. And I just went up, and I was like just about to reach for another cam, a really good placement, because I was worried about this one. And I just felt this pop. And I was like, oh God. And that's it. I just went flying down the gully, you know, this groove. And I got the ropes came tight, and there was feathers everywhere because I was wearing down jacket, and they were just going up the wall. Yeah, so I really quickly just did a body check because I really didn't want to have broken anything, because, you know, right now I'm probably up there. Yeah, and quickly I gripped everything as hard as I could to check if I'd broken anything. I was like, right, okay. And then I shouted down to Twid. I was like, I'm okay. And he went, what? So he'd been on this belay and he'd not even noticed anything going on. So I was like, oh my God, he missed the biggest fall I've ever done. And I'm alive. And he's just completely oblivious to it as well. Yeah. I was like, oh, well, back to it. Yeah. So this is how bad as it got. And I can remember this day, Twid actually said to me, oh, you're the lightest. You can go first. And I was like, what? And all the ropes were just coated in ice so that when you zoom out up it, just shards of ice just stripped all of the rope. That was a pretty memorable epic, that. And abseiling back down this was awful. The whole wall just turned into like ice and glass. And we had really strong winds. You might be thinking, why are you there? Well, we had to retrieve all of our gear, which was at the top of the wall here. So we were going up to get it, hoping that the weather would improve. And we were trying to strip our ropes because we decided we were going. Yeah. And yeah, I can remember actually pulling down the ropes to abseil to get out. And at one point, we were flung by the wind over this side of the wall here. And it was like being in a river. And I had the abseil rope nearly cutting me in half in the wind. And I was just, you couldn't get any purchase on the rock at all. Yeah, and this was all the horror stories that you hear about Patagonia. It didn't happen often, but that was one of them. Yeah. And this is the central tower of Piney here in the middle. This was after that storm. So this is in our portaledge at the base of the wall at the col. And we'd been rationing food at this stage. But at this point, we knew we weren't going back up. And I actually got jaw ache because we had this packet of Oreos. And I remember vividly eating these Oreos like this. And my jaw started to, we hadn't had chocolate for ages and we knew we were descending. So I was like, give me those biscuits. And yeah, that was yeah. I remember getting back down to base camp, advanced base camp, and the wind in Patagonia it can get quite intense. It's all the time, this constant wind. And I can remember packing, and my thermarest just went, whoop, and I was at the stage where I was just like, I'm not bothered. And I just carried on packing, and it's just gone. Right, so that's, haven't put you off yet, have I? No. The odd good epic story, yeah. So this is Cerro Torre. I was really, and most of the time, I'm not an amazing climber. I'm just pretty average. Like to work hard, and I think it's more important who you're with, with on these expeditions. I think that's what gets you up these routes. And the team I was with this was amazing. Dave Turnbull and Dan Donovan, the team in Patagonia, Ollie Sanders, Twid Turner, Di Lampard. You don't have to be the best climber in the world, but, the team morale and the crack that you can have. I think Dave put it well on this trip. It's important to have a nice time on an expedition. It's not all about who the best climber is. It's about having a nice time. And we had a nice time on this trip. It was still pretty hard work, but I thought that was pretty important. The route goes through, what we did was round the back. So you go through, up through here. Yeah, so you climb up through this lot, up through here. And to this col here. So this is Cerro Standhart and Torriega and Cerro Torre. And Cerro Torre, the route we did was still the only British ascent of the route. And I think 3 British teams, correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm sure some people in this audience have been here. And I think Paul Moores has been on the top and Ian Peter, so all Scottish. So they're the only 3 British teams that have been to the summit of Cerro Torre. And Paul Moores is over in Glencoe in the Alps, and Ian Peters in Kingussie. Yeah. And they did the compressor route on this side through here. But the year we were there, the compressor route was taken down. So we went and did the Ragni route on the back, and that takes this skyline here. And I remember this bit here getting through because it's a few days, and we packed, and I was really clinical about, because we had we packed for about 5 days out bivouacking, and I can remember Dave look at me, and we packed this toothbrush. I packed my toothbrush in the top, and he was like, "Why are you taking that?" I was like, "Oh, I like to clean my teeth." And I remember the first night we were bivouacked down on some boulders, and it was raining on us down in here. And I cowered in, and I just got into my sleeping bag, and he just leaned over and went, "Are you going to clean your teeth?" And that next day, the route finding through here was horrific. I can remember getting to one crevasse, and I just looked forward, and I went, "Nope, it's not over there. No, that's death." Right, okay, went back over here. No, it's definitely not over there. Right, death it is. So yeah, that was when you're in an absolute maze and you hit a dead end. But we got over there. Oh. So that's the team: Dave Turnbull on the left, and Dan Donovan. Again, great guys, really good friends. Team Green, we were there. We had civvies, that's our civvies, and we had hill kit and that was it. So sometimes we did our trekking in jeans. It's quite good fun. But a really nice, fun team to be with. This trip, we didn't get any funding for, just support through equipment and sponsors, and it was more of a holiday for us, really. Yeah. The intention was to do this route, the Casarotto Pillar, on Fitzroy, and this is Pransino here. But about 2 weeks before, thanks to the internet, I saw people were climbing the Ragni. So I started doing pull-ups on my ice axes, because the Ragni is an ice route. It's a really, really long, steep ice route, and has the famous summit mushroom pitch at the end. So I quietly, and all the lads were keen on rock. So I had to really kind of front load this idea of maybe not doing that. It took about a week to convince them slowly, but I managed to convince them that maybe we should think about Cerro Torre, and it's getting done. Yeah, and quietly in the background, I'm training away on my ice axes. And then I managed to convince them. They're like, "Okay, we'll leave the cams," and went with ice screws. But it was really nice. Patagonia, I had this horrific vision of landing, and you've just got to make the most out of any weather window in Patagonia. And I really didn't want to get there and just land and go. So I felt really lucky when we landed. It was bad weather. It was 2 stronger winds. So we could ease into it, relax and have a nice few days training and packing and preparing. I was really relieved of that. So we did some trekking, and there's another really famous shot of Fitzroy and Pransino. I did try Fitzroy in 2002, and we spent 14 nights in a snow hole at the base of Fitzroy. And in that month, the longest spell of good weather we had was 12 hours. Yeah. So that was a pretty horrific trip. And it was that trip I remember listening to World Service Christmas Day in this really wet, horrible shack. And at that point, I was like, right, I'm never going away on Christmas Day again. I just want to be at home right now. And since then, I have stayed at home on Christmas since then, yeah. This is the night before, Team Green, before Cerro Torre. So we're packing for 5 days out. A little bit of red wine there. And we had this, we didn't know what to pack. We didn't have all posh food. And I can remember us, and we had some of the best climbers in the world in this hostel with us as well. And they knew about this weather window, so they were packing to go big as well. And there was this one funny moment where we were making sandwiches. And the Americans were horrified at this, the fact that we were making sandwiches, because they were weighing powder and putting it into bags per day. God knows what it was for, but they had the scales out and everything. And I couldn't help but be a bit intimidated by this, because I was like, well, what are they doing? Because they're obviously the best. Anyway, at this point, we were making sandwiches, and Dave was like, well, what are we going to put in them? I was like, cheese. And he was like, yeah, okay, yeah. I was like, well, when we were on the farm, when we were younger, we always had cheese and jam sandwiches. And Dave was like, sounds great. We'll cheese and jam sandwiches. Right, and then we worked out how many each we were going to have per day. We were away for 4 or 5 days. And I said, right. I said, okay, Dave, well, that's 30 cheese and jam sandwiches. And he was like, 30? And I was like, okay, 35. And at this point, the Americans were like, what? So we carried 35 cheese and jam sandwiches into Cerro Torre. Now, we didn't have any room in our bags for these. So we had the plastic bags that feel like they're going to cut your fingers off. Well, Dan carried one of those all the way into Nipanino, and that's like this plastic bag that was like really tight around his fingers. I was like, you okay with that, Dave? He's like, yeah, it's fine. So here he is. No room in the bags, but we had this like carrier bag full of 35 cheese and jam sandwiches. Yeah. Now for this trip, this Cerro Torre trip, it was the one where I'd actually did some training beforehand. Because a lot of people ask about how do you train for expeditions. There's so much money and time invested in them. A lot of it is actually not getting injured. So prior to a trip and going away, for me, it was just not twisting an ankle, not going over on a knee, but staying in good shape. But for this trip, because of my previous Patagonia trips and the amount of distance you've got to cover and then climb, I did loads of running. And I think if I'd done 1 day less of running, we wouldn't have done this route. It was that tight, and I came away thinking there was American trail runners there. I was thinking that's the fitness that you want to have. It was a bit like, walking to the Grand Duras out of Chamonix, but with no footpaths and no uplift. It was 2 days of walking, and then you would do your climb. So it was quite difficult trying to have that fitness and endurance. Yeah, but we got there, but I was pretty broken after it. This is a famous place called Col of Hope. These places you read about when you're younger, and you just think, never. I'm never going to be there. And then when you are there, it's pretty shocking. I can remember when I feel so lucky, but I can remember my friend shouting when the Iger, he's like, what's it like around there? And I can remember I said, I'm on the Hinterstoicer Traverse. I was thinking to myself, what the fuck am I doing here? I just did not feel worthy, just even saying those words. And here, this is Col of Hope on Cerro Torre. Big days. Yeah, alpine, lots of distance. So I think we'd set off midnight the night before. And this was us in that evening. And the next day, we're going to set off at 1 o'clock the next night and start the climbing. Yeah. Cerro Torre had these famous ice flutings, vertical ice flutings, that have turned back loads of teams. We were really lucky this season, the condition of the route, and it was getting climbed quite a lot. It was so complete fluke. And we had the biggest weather window that Patagonia had for years, tens of years. It was like 3 or 4 weeks of settled weather. Yeah, very lucky. And this is the famous last pitch of Cerro Torre that people have climbed the entire mountain and got to this point and not been able to get through it. And I can remember Dave handing the ice screws over to me and saying, this is going to be the pitch of your life. I was like, oh my God. And yeah, it was quite something. This is looking down the summit ice tunnel. So a climber in front had managed to turn around and just take a shot of me, looking down. So it's actually a hole in the mushroom that you tunnel through and climb through. Yeah. So that's on the summit. I felt really, really lucky, but at the same time, you're only halfway there. We knew we had the glacier to get out as well. The ice cap, sorry. So you've seen there's with Fitzroy in the background there. And there you can see, so you've seen a before slide of us looking very civilized. And this is a during, okay? Yeah. And you're going to, there's Dan. That's a during shot as well, before, during, and the after's about to come up. So you can see we're in an open bivouac there, just that's back at Col of Hope after summiting. And Dan was nails, you know, I can remember Dan, we were abseiling down and the snow was getting warm and there was ice falling down. And there's pellets of ice streaming past, like, doof, doof, and then Dan's going first, and then he stops. I was like, what's he doing? And he's in this shower of ice shards coming down. And there was running water in the little gullies on the face. And Dan just locks off his belay plate, gets out his water bottle, leans down, and just takes a drink. And meanwhile, there's ice shards flying past him, and we're in quite a hurry. But Dan was so chilled, you know. So if you ever, he lives in Bristol, so if you ever see Dan, you know, say hello, and he will buy you a drink. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And this is the walk out. This is the big epic walk out. I remember asking a legend down there, a local hero's name. I can't remember just now. It'll come back to me in a minute. But we got a lot of beta off him. And for Cerro Torre, we've just dropped through this col here, and then come back round and then up here. And then to walk out, you go off, you walk around the ice cap, which is a really long way. And he says, you know, he was telling us in the village Chalten, he was like, yeah, the ice cap could be challenging on the way out. You know, if you don't get frozen conditions, it will be really bad. It'll be hard. And I'm like, oh, right. Any tips? What do you think? He says, well, yeah, you don't want it wet, but if you are walking out that way, you've just climbed Cerro Torre, so you'll be fine. I was like, oh yeah, cool, okay. He says, yeah, you will feel amazing. So we were hoping to have climbed it, which we managed to, and then he was right. You know, life's good. You know, so if you hit a bit of wet snow, then we just battle on and truck on. It was a long way out because we'd ran out of food at this stage. And other teams were walking out as well. And I can remember coming across some other teams and some really supportive. We got some other food from others. So we managed to kind of like pool all our food together. And that got us out. But that's an after shot. So, that I would like, maybe like a night out in the vault in Aviemore. But that I was pretty battered after that. Shot. And Dave saw me when I woke up in this. This is in a shack. We've still got another day to go back to Chalten. And Dave saw me wake up and he said, stop right there. And he just took a photo. He said, that's going in the downstairs bathroom, that. I think, I don't think wore much sun cream. Anyway, back to the village, and I took a few days off just to try and recover and a bit of partying. So really, really lucky, and I think with a lot of these expeditions, I think it gives you a really good perspective, you know, the people you meet and the experiences you go through. I think it really makes you appreciate the really little things. And also the value of the climbing and the mountaineering that we've got here as well. It's really world class. You know, it's pretty hard to beat. And you know, traveling the world helps you appreciate that as well. So I feel really, really lucky. Yeah. Right, on to the last epic for the evening. I'm not, I'm not boring you, am I? I can remember doing this slideshow. I did it for work a while ago. I could remember doing lots of slideshows, and they were always to an adult audience, so you can always have a bit of a laugh, yeah, and you could connect a little bit. And I can remember being asked to do a talk to a school group, and I was pretty like, I said to a friend, I said, what do I say? He's like, well, one, don't bore them to death. And then two, just tell them you nearly died in every shot. I was like, okay. And it worked because I said, on here, we nearly died. And we got, ooh. And yeah, nearly died here as well. Oh. So there we go. So I'm trying not to bore you to death. Yeah. Yeah. Good. Right. Baffin Island. Yeah. Pretty big place. Yeah, so like after my little chat with my friend where he said 10 days max on that wall, 10 days, it'll be fine. We get a skidoo in, logistically easy, fine, okay, yeah, great. It was really quite expensive, and I think that was a big, I was again really lucky, but it's one of the reasons why I might not do that again. I don't know, it's quite a lot of money, a lot of logistics, I thought it was quite big epic place, and a lot of risk as well, but then I was very lucky to have that experience. Really, this is us in a tiny little outpost village called Clyde River, and this is far north in Baffin Island. And I can remember my friend, when we were in there, we were doing a bit of risk assessment. We had a staff meeting at base camp. I said, what if we have a bit of trouble? And we were like, well, because we didn't have EPIRBs or anything, or any kind of sat phone. Well, we had a sat phone actually, because you'll see a picture of that later on. But Clyde River, there's no infrastructure. I think there's about 400 people that live there, skidoos and things. And I remember a friend who'd done a bit of work in Greenland. He says, well, I've got a mate who's got a helicopter in Greenland. And that was it. So that was our support. Yeah. And then, from the geography side of it, I then realized where we were in the middle of nowhere, quite far north. When we landed, I tried not to be too intimidated. All of us had done quite a lot by then. But when we landed, I was like, I really had doubts about how we'd cope in the cold. It was so cold. I was like, how on earth are we going to be able to climb in this? And I didn't share this. You kind of retain a little bit of this and just try and process that and try and also think and try and adapt a little bit and try and cope. But anyway, stood next to these guys. So these are the locals. You can't help but feel a bit intimidated. And they have a little bit of they check you out. Yeah, so you're the newbies in town. And they say, you're going where? Because they know where they're dropping you off. So these guys give us a lift. And the whole time you're trying to demonstrate that you know what you're doing. Yeah. And because they're trying to look after you at the same time. So they often come up to us, we're making a brew, and they're like, oh, do you want a cup of tea? And I'm like, oh, no. I was like, Mark, get that stove on quick. Because they want to know that you're going to be okay as well, because they have a look at your stoves. They want to know how much food you're taking, a pickup time and a drop-off time, a pickup time, and so on and so on. Because they're not coming back to get us. They're not going to come and check in on us because they're so far away. Where we were going was about a 9-hour trip on skidoo to get to. Yeah. And you might wonder why you're going when it's frozen. Well, you could sail to where we went. And actually some Black Diamond climbers did make a video about this recently. And they sailed to it. And I know the Belgian lads, the Belgian crew who sailed, they sailed into here as well. The weather tends to be stable. We were aiming to go big walling, so aid climbing rather than free climbing. And the weather was a bit more stable and less mosquitoes. That's what I was told anyway. I had my doubts at this stage. It was so cold. It was hard to tell. -20. Yeah, I don't know. Any Greenland experts? Yeah. Minus, I don't know. It's a different cold. I've felt colder in Scotland, in winter, but yeah, -15 regularly. Yeah, around about that cold. One day it froze the fuel in our MSR, so we couldn't have any food that day. So that's petrol, so it's, yeah, -15, something like that. Skidoo ride on the way in. And again, the connection with this community, such an amazing insight to how these people live. It was fascinating. So I feel really, really lucky. I can remember skidooing along, and the Inuit, so the guy, I was behind him, but they've got their rifles always stored so they can access them. And while skidooing, saw this seal, pulled his rifle around whilst the skidoo was moving, and took a shot at the seal and got it while the skidoo was moving. Because they've only got so much time before it just goes plop back into its hole. Really quite fascinating. And these are I guess in summertime that they would live out in further away. So this is them hunting on the way in, really. So again, nothing to do with our trip. They've just stopped for food. Because I can remember them just stopping and we're like, what are we doing? Well, they're hunting for themselves. They didn't tell us. They just stopped. Yeah, had nothing. We were like, we want to get to our big wall, but no, they had more important things going on. Yeah. So this is what it looks like, these frozen seas and the big walls coming out of them. We'd heard horror stories, so in the back of our minds there was a horror story, and this is where the epic at the end is going to come in. This thaws out. Yeah. And we'd heard stories of some people, a Swiss team in particular, that were left isolated. And it's about a 6-week period between this goes from mush to water that you can sail on. Yeah. So it's important that we had to get picked up at a certain date. Otherwise, the skidoos can't ride on the ice. It goes back to water. Yeah, so we heard stories about this Swiss team back in the day living off the land before they could get out because they couldn't walk out so far. Yeah. All this is going on in the back of your mind. And these are the views on the way in. We actually skidooed up through there. You took a gully up the side here. It's pretty damn impressive, Yeah. And this is one of the biggest walls in the world. So this is the Walker Arm. That's a feature in the fjord area. And this is the Polar Sun Spire. I think it's 1,400 meters of wall. Yeah, this wall here. One of the biggest features in the world. Very remote. So they got us in, and this is what we were underneath. And they had more important things going on. They had to get back, and they were going to spend a couple of days. But we got to the bottom of this, and our plan was to climb this wall here. Very quickly, we just looked at that and went, no way. It was just blank. So we focused our attention. I was like, what's that cracked pillar on the left? So we climbed this one instead. Yeah. And this was our base camp kitchen. And on expedition, you kind of miss some things. You miss the obvious home comforts. But living becomes very, very simple. And probably the one thing people don't often ask, but you realize when you come back what you miss the most. And what I missed the most was one, a toaster. It's the thought of a toaster was amazing. You know, a kettle. You know, when you're living out here for weeks, melting snow, a kettle is fascinating. The fact you just flick that and that is boiled water in seconds is amazing. And the other one, a toilet, a proper toilet. Yeah, just they're the things that I missed the most when on trips. Yeah. So this was base camp, and what we climbed probably made one of the hardest, most scariest moves in my life around about there. Yeah, not up here, but down here. It was terrifying. And I can remember we had bolts. Yeah, you know, bolts. I know it's awful, but you know, it was normal practice to put bolts on these big walls. And I can remember carrying it. We carried about, I don't know, about 30 bolts. And to us, that was like gold. That was like, oh, amazing. And when we were presented with 30 bolts, you felt like you were invincible. So early on, it was, I guess it's a bit, you know, we got into, down here, you'd be climbing and you'd get scared and you'd be like, oh, I'm going to put a bolt in. Is that all right? And it's like, yeah, we've got loads of those. Put a bolt in. And to put a bolt in hand, it'd take about half an hour of hard work. Yeah, with a hand driver. Anyway, that's all great and you feel really safe. But then we ran out of bolts about here. Yeah, and that felt all of a sudden quite serious. So we were a little bit greedy and we got scared too quickly. And we used bolts a bit too much, I think. Yeah. Anyway, at this point, we were just relaxing, getting ready, ferrying kit up to here, just knowing that things were going to get harder at some point. You know, so down here in the home comforts, you kind of like thinking, okay, you know, I'm making the most of this because it's going to get grim soon. And I don't know, you just sign into this little test. I'm sure we've all done it, you know, where you just think, right, I'm just going to get on with this for the next little while and, you know, and enjoy the time afterwards. But you just get your head down and graft for a few days. How long it was going to take, we did not know. We just did not know. We packed food for 10 to 15 days, maybe a little bit more. Yeah. And we started rationing about here. And I can remember one night in the portledge next to Mark was right next to me, and I heard this rustling. So we were running out of food and we were rationing. Twid was like, he was really experienced. He'd done most big walls anywhere. So he was calling a lot of the shots. So me and Mark were in a portledge together and Twid was in his own portledge. And in the middle of the night, I heard this like chocolate bar wrapper. And this was quite a way into the expedition where we were starting to get worried about food. I was like, Mark. I was whispering. I was like, what are you doing? I think we'd rationed ourselves. And this is where I can't see another Cliff Bar again. You know, we got sponsored by Cliff Bar for this trip. So we had, I think it was 2 Cliff Bars a day and 2 chocolate bars and a boil in the bag meal and a couple of cereal bars for breakfast as well. So that was it. And then we started to strip down on the chocolate as well. So we'd have 1 chocolate bar a day. And in the end, we just had, we were given this bag and we're like, yeah, do what you want with it. But our ration was 1. And we'd already had our chocolate that day. And I can remember Mark having open this chocolate bar in the night. And I was like, should I have one? He was like, it's up to you. I was like, what's it like? And he's like, it's amazing. I was like, okay, right. I'm going to have one as well. If you're having one, I'm having one. Yeah. So that's just the scale of it. you know, here right now, you know, you might think, why did it take you 23 days? Well, we're route finding. Nobody had been here before. And you're more or less trying to find a crack. And because it was cold and it was really steep, we were averaging 2 pitches a day. And that's like 100 meters. Yeah. And one day we didn't do anything because it was too cold to get out of the portaledges. And then there were some days when we did 1 pitch a day. Yeah, because we would run out or we'd have to try and find a different direction. Yeah. But everything lived in that. Everything. So 2 people were in that portaledge. Everything was inside there. And I remember everything, the key things that live on you, your lippy, toilet paper, painkillers, and a lighter. That never leaves that pocket. You know, these systems that you get used to, I'm sure you're all used to that. But you just can't lose anything in that portaledge. Yeah. And you're really close to each other. It's like you like, it's almost quite cozy. It's like a cocoon. You know, I know there's these really great, comfortable portaledge photos you see in the magazines. They're not that comfortable. And there's no room once you're in it. So you end up having the systems of one person gets in at a time, and everything is hanging in there as well. Yeah. I can remember at this point we were chilling one day, and this did get spindrift avalanched a few times, and that was quite scary in the night. I just heard this like, and immediately I was pushed off the wall. That was quite scary. And Mark was always on the outside. I can remember chilling here one day, and we'd been in the area for a long time by this stage, and we'd seen nothing. And then I heard this like buzzing noise, and I was like, oh, wow, is that a skidoo? How interesting. I wonder who that is, where they go in. And it got louder. Yeah, that is definitely a skidoo. And it's getting louder. So we're starting to look now down the fjord. And I was like, I can't see it. And then all of a sudden, this rock just went about 15 meters out from us into the snow. So the wall was that steep. Yeah, so it'd come from the top, and we'd heard it the entire time just falling down. And we're going, oh, it'll be steep then. So this is aid climbing. Most of the time, you're trying to free whenever you can. Now you're in plastic boots, you're in down pants. And I think, you know, there's this vision to try and free climb whenever you can. And then you get to this point where you think, oh, come on, this would be easy. So you unclip from your system and you shout down, I'm going free. Now that doesn't mean that you're soloing. You're still roped up, but you're not aid climbing. Aid climbing is where you pull on kit you put in. Free climbing is climbing we do every day. It's faster, far more pure and normal. So you're still attached to ropes and you are safe, but it's quite scary. And I can remember at this point shouting down, I was like, come on, we've got to get a move on. Right. Okay. So I unclipped. I'm going free. And they're all like, yeah, go for it, man. Go for it. And then I'm like I do one move and then another. And you're in full on kit, huge rack, you know, like dangling everywhere, really heavy. You make 2 moves of about V diff and go, oh, I'm going back aiding. And so I had you have a hero moment for 2 moves. Yeah, in times like this. So even though you want to try and free climb, nearly always it comes down to aid climbing when it's hard to get out of that system once you've started it. Aid climbing. Yeah. And it's in these kind of conditions. And we're just trying to follow features. And I can remember there's this, often people ask about the toilet and how do you go to the toilet up here once you're on the wall? Well, you actually find a ledge off to the side. It's good not to do it near the port ledge because it stinks. Yeah, you can do it. You can have a wee off the port ledge, but not the other stuff. And I can remember finding this ledge off to the route, and I was quite impressed. I was quite happy with myself because you got so many clothes on, and I managed to do the business off on this quite private ledge to the side, off to the route, so that we're not going to climb anywhere near it. And I was just putting my gear back on, and my foot slipped, and my hand went down on the ledge where I'd been. And I was like, oh my God. So I was quickly on the granite. I was like scraping it off. I had snow and everything. I was like, oh my God, I don't know how many more days I'm going to be up here. So I abseiled down to the guys after doing my toilet. And I said, lads, have you got any wet wipes? And they just looked up at me like, they've got beards on, right? And they just go, wet wipes? So yeah, not a nice moment, really. Yeah. So this is all the normal climbing gear. I guess one of the challenges you've got is the ropes and actually, safeguarding your ropes, not getting them cut on edges and things. So, being tactical where you put the ropes, making sure that they're away from sharp edges. We seem to find the shadiest place in the Arctic. So this corner actually faced northeast or something like that. And it was always cold. So I was actually thinking of calling it Cold Corner at some point, the route. Yeah. Or the lightest it got was around about 3 a.m. So I was almost thinking about 3 a.m. Eternal KLF track. Yeah. But in the end, we called it Arctic Monkeys, the route. But yeah, hard days. And, not much water during the day as well. And where do we get water from? Well, with binoculars, you're very tactical upon where you put your port ledges next to ledges of snow. Yeah, so you could, you just melt the snow on the ledge next to you. Yeah, as wherever you're camped. Yeah. Yeah, I think to free climb it might go at something like E4, maybe something like that. Yeah, but we were A climbing. And if we found a corner like that, that was like really nice because you could get gear into it. And this was the second portledge camp. Yeah, I can remember being really quite clinical about this and thinking, because you try to stay clipped on as much as you can. But after about, you wear your harness when you're sleeping as well. But after about 6 days in, that harness kind of ends up living about, when you're in your sleeping bag, it ends up living about here, there's some comfort. And after about 8-9 days of getting used to this system, you kind of convince yourself that if it's round your knees, that if everything was to fail, you'd fall landing like that. So you'd be safe. Yeah. And then come day 15 or 18, you get into this and you just think, right, it's right off. Yeah, fine. Yeah. So you start off really clinical, but you kind of get used to it in a different way later on. So again, trying to find a way. And this is like some of the views that we had looking across through the wall. I can remember one night we were rationing the fuel as well. And it was getting quite cold. And I had this really cold, I don't know if I'm sure you have experienced this before, but the bottom of my sleeping bag felt wet and cold. And it was after quite a few days up there. And I couldn't, for whatever reason, even holding my feet, get the bottom of the sleeping bag warm. And I was really confused what was going on. And then one night, Mark leant over to me. We were boiling because we took turns at cooking the food outside. And he leant over to me and he said, "Stu, do you want a hot water bottle tonight?" I was like, "Yeah." And at that point, I think we had the stove on for quite a long time, and Twid was like, he's like, "Hey, watch that fuel out there." And because you could hear the stove going on. And at that point, Mark turned around and he said, "How hot do you want it?" And I was like, "Boiling." So he kept on cranking the fuel up. And I can remember he put the hot water into the Nalgene bottle. And we got into our sleeping bags. And he was right next to me. And I remember him using the hot water bottle to start off with. So he slid the hot water bottle down to his feet. And then all of a sudden, I just heard this. And I was like, no. So I knocked him. And at that point, he was like, "Oh," I was like, "My turn." So we're whispering so that Twid can't hear next door. And I instantly put it to my feet and I just fell asleep straight away. You know, that tension, I think it was probably frostbite or frost setting in slowly, but it just immediately warmed my feet up and I just slept. It was so nice. So I'm sure it's a Greenland tip, a hot water bottle for the feet. Yeah. But yeah, there's another shot. Nearly died. There you go. You meant to go, ooh. Yeah. So you see the rope here. So we've been jury-marrying up and down on this rope. And I agreed to get the photo taken after I'd gone past it with my system. I was like, "Yeah, you can take the photo now." Yeah. But I could see it as I was jury-marrying up to it. So I was thinking very light at that time. I was like, oh my God. And then once I was past, I was like, "Yeah, you can take the photo now." Yeah. Right, we're getting to near the top now. So food was out. Yeah, we didn't have much food at all. And fuel as well. We were out of that. We had 2 days. We convinced ourselves we could keep going for 2 days. And the terrain eased off. So we went alpine, less of this aid climbing. And we did. We managed to do about 8 pitches per day to get to the top. So we managed to really make up a lot of time compared to 1 or 2 pitches of steep aid climbing lower down. So at this point, we'd ditched all the camp. So we'd left all of our security behind. We had 2 ropes and a rack. And we were just going to the top or not. We couldn't camp out. We had no camping equipment. We were just going to keep climbing. And then we got to the top. So this is the view from the summit. This is, I think, maybe 28 days without a wash. 23 days in the same clothes. You don't take them off to get into the sleeping bag. You just wear everything in the sleeping bag. Yeah, so I think it's 23 days, 24 days in the same clothes. Yeah. So yeah, we named the route Arctic Monkeys. But we knew that was only halfway, really. Abseiling down, we got down quite quickly. We were doing 100-meter abseils because we had a lot of rope to do that. But it still took us 24 hours on the go, basically, before we got back down to base camp. Yeah. So this is us on the lower slabs, getting to base camp. And you're abseiling with everything. You know, the portaledges, they're all hung off your harness between your legs and the haul bags. So you're wondering about how food, how do we carry that much food? We had a 110 litre haul bag each. And in that was sleeping bags and food. Yeah. So we had 3 of those. Yeah. And there you go. That's the line of the route. You see the red line up through here? Yeah. And this was the time that I'd been looking forward to the most. And that was just walking around like a penguin, for forever. Kit out in the sun. And next thing I was dreaming about was a bath and a shower, and maybe a bath straight after that as well. So I could chain baths. Yeah. That's all I was thinking about. That never happened. And what happened was a really quick transition getting home because we were late. That didn't really happen. What happened next? We knew we were quite late, and we knew it was quite warm. So we were really worried about the condition of the fjord on the ice. So even though we were really looking forward to the Inuits arriving on their skidoos and just going with all our kit and over to you. Yeah. Well, none of that happened. And what happened next was a bit of a test. So I can remember we were packed ready, waiting for the Inuits. And we were waiting for a good all morning and then into the afternoon. And it was a good 6 hours of waiting probably at base camp. And we were like, what is going on? So we did have a sat phone, and we phoned the agent in Clyde River, and he said he can't get to you. The Inuits can't get to you. And we were like, right, okay. And I can remember my friend's body language on the phone. He was on the sat phone like this, and then he just went like that. He went, oh, right. So we were told that night we had to walk and get to the walker arm before the morning. So walk through the night. So that was after doing 23 days on the wall. Yeah. I couldn't really remember how to walk. Yeah. So we kind of, positively got our stuff together and said, right, phase 2, get out of there. And we packed everything up and dragged it. So I can remember having a rucksack on and my harness on and dragging the portledge on the end of, so I had a haul bag. We were dragging it along conditions like this, and it was best described as like slushy porridge. So the top 6 inches was just wet. So they couldn't skidoo on it. That's why they couldn't skidoo. And we would not have got out if we'd not had these, what we call Baffin wellies. I don't know if you've been in Greenland, base camp wellies. So we had wellies that came to here, and we were literally slopping in sludge, dragging our kit. And all we had to navigate off was a photocopy of Google Earth of that fjord. And it was about, 20K that asked us to walk that night along this fjord. Honestly, falling through was the least of our worries. It really didn't even cross our mind. We said, let's not go right into the middle. And we were like, oh, but you can't go too close to the edge either. So we were somewhere in that like middle, the edge, near the edge, but not in the edge. And it was quite a dark moment, really. And I can remember a storm coming through, and all the stickers that we had for sponsorship, they all ripped off, and they were flying into the air. And I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening here? It was a pretty low moment. We didn't really know if we were going to get out. At that point, my friend Twid came up to us and he said, this isn't good, guys. And I was like, oh my God, this is serious now. He said, this isn't good. And he said, we're not going to get out. We're going to have to leave our kit. So we were like, yeah, he's right. We've gone nowhere. We were trying to drag everything we had with us. So what we did, we went to the edge and we left everything apart from 2 days fuel and food and gas. And we'd managed to restock from base camp and a tent, one tent. And that was it. because we had to get to the walk around to get lifted out. All that kit, we agreed the Inuits could, the agent could come and collect it later on, have it, whatever. We had to get out because we'd heard of these stories of people being left in there. Part of our backup plan was to walk back to base camp and live there for 6 weeks. Whether we had that much, we don't know. Anyway, so off we went with very little on us at all. And I can remember then we were still walking through the night, and we carried one big pot. We had one big whole bag full of kit, and the rest of us had rucksacks. And I was starting to get blisters at this point on my boots, and that was getting pretty sore as well. Hopefully, I'm not putting you off too much. Yeah, really valuable experience looking back on it. Type 2 fun. Actually, nearly got type 3. I think type 3 is when, right, this isn't fun and never will be. Yeah, so it did get to type 3, actually. Yeah, because we then realized we don't want the Inuits, if they are there, to go. So we had a rifle with us. So we came up with this idea of firing off rounds every hour. So we fired off 2 rounds every hour. Hopefully that they might hear that. Now, at that moment, when you're absolutely knackered and you were laid on the ground and somebody's firing a rifle into the air next to you, it didn't strike type 2 fun to me. Like, I was thought, this is quite serious. Yeah, so that was probably type 3. Yeah. But part of it. Yeah. And then we had, so we got to the risk of polar bears. So we got to where we were due to be picked up to the walk around, and we saw some skidoo tracks and we saw some seal blood. And we were like, right, they've done a bit of hunting and they've gone. We're late. And I can't remember what time it was, but we'd walked through the night. So it was sometime in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, something like that. And it's at this point when this is what we look like at this stage. And that's Twid in the background. And Twid's on the phone to his wife there saying he's going to be late. Yeah. So he says, and he was like, we're going to be late for work. I was like, oh, okay, right. So we really didn't know what was going to happen now at all. But we had to sleep. And at this stage, my friend Twid reminded us about the polar bear risk, right? And I was like, at that stage, I was like, well, look, it can't get any worse. Yeah. So I wasn't so bothered. But he then managed to convince us. He was like, no, honestly, they'll outrun you. Yeah. You won't be able to, you won't see them coming. And I was like, my God, you might be actually right. And when you're out there, you then look around you and you can't help but feel like food. You are food. There is nothing out there at all. I was like, my gosh, he is right. He's like, oh, yeah. So we need to be prepared, guys, for bears. I was like, oh, okay, right. So we're putting the tent up. And at that point, just as we put the tent up, we could see this white dot on the horizon. It's literally just white, nothing. And there's this white dot. And we're pretty tired by this stage. And I was like, and my friend Mark went, what's that? And we all started looking. And we were like, is that a bear? And my friend was like, I knew it. I bloody knew it. That's a polar bear. And at that stage, I was like, right, he's right. This is it. This is it. And so we got Mark. I was like, Mark, right. So we got some sort of like, positioning for Mark. And we laid him down with the rifle. And I got all the ammo lined up next to him. And we were ready for a bit of a battle. And I leant over to Mark and I said, right, Mark, kill this thing to death. And at just that point, just before he fired at it, these 2 seagulls that we thought were the polar bear just went split apart, went up into the air. So we were like, oh my God. Yeah. So we had this little bear wire And I can remember Tuid was like, all right, we'll put this as a perimeter around the tent. Come on, let's do that. So me and Mark pulled it out and it literally went and then stopped. And we were like, oh, shit, well, that's not very big. And then we were like, oh, well, put it across the front of the tent. And we're like, what? As if it's going to knock. So this like bear wire was about 3 meters long. So yeah, so at that point it was like, well, it is what it is, and we were like, right, we need to sleep now. So we got into our sleeping bags, and zipped it up. And at that point, I heard the nicest thing ever, and that was the sound of a skidoo. And the Inuits were actually just round the corner waiting for us, and they were actually going when they managed to just out the corner of their eye see our tent. And it was at that stage when the Inuit, he opened up the tent and he leant in. He was like, hello. And I was like, oh, it's so nice to see you. And he was like, yeah, it's good, it's good. Do you want something to eat? And at that point, I just said, yes, please. Yeah. Because, prior to that, we were like all about trying to show them that we could cope. And I was like, no. Yeah, some food would be great. I think he handed us a bar of chocolate or something like that. And then for me, that was it. It was over, switch off, release a bit. And I was really impressed with how they got us out. They got us out in some pretty bad weather. And we were all tired. They were tired as well. I can remember being on the skidoo holding on to this guy. And I felt the accelerator just go, ding, 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 ding. And I could see him just doing this. So I tapped him on the side. So we were all tired. Yeah. But we got back to Clyde River. And I can remember going into this little porter cabin, this guy's house. And I walked in and was like, oh, it's a really nice place. But I was quietly thinking to myself, yeah, but it does stink. Yeah. Gosh, it's quite smelly, but never mind. It's really, really nice. Yeah. Anyway, then had a shower and I realized that stink was us and actually how bad we actually smelled. And I did. So I didn't get my shower and double bath. All I got was this little trickle of a shower in this guy's cabin, and we were late for the flight. So 8 hours later, I was in 9 hours, 10 hours later after a couple of flights, I was in Manchester's train station in a long, long queue with 2 haul bags. And never has any sort of transition struck me. That was just quite hard to deal with. I was stood there, 2 portage bags, and just different world. Yeah. But an amazing experience. So, thank you very much. Thank you. Hope I didn't bore you to death.
No, that was...
Yeah.
No, that was a fantastic talk. Thank you. And not just one adventure, multiple adventures. Yeah. I suspect you were safe from the polar bears, though. The smell would have kept the polar bear away.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Questions? People have questions? I was just fascinated by the fact that you found Coleman's gas.
The Eiger.
Bottles of beer.
Yeah, quite lucky. Didn't find anything out there.
And then your Juma.
Yeah.
So it looks like there's a pattern emerging here.
I guess
The gods are with you.
Maybe a balance. Yeah, because a lot of these expeditions don't work out.
No.
So you don't get to the top.
Yeah.
So it does balance out. I think it depends on the objective and how hard the objective is, but the chance of success, it's not high.
Can you have a good expedition without getting to the top?
Yeah. I think Changabang was like an amazing, memorable experience. Just getting back in one piece and not actually having frostbite. Being on the mountain for quite a long time, above 6,000 meters, and just getting back all in one piece, and both of you fine. was great. You're trying every day, but yeah, you come home, and I can remember telling some friends that did you get to the top? No, we didn't. Oh, right. You watch the football last night? So you kind of like those experiences. You have to just keep to yourself a little bit. Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? Do you know the fatigue? You said you've obviously done the climb, exhausted. Then you said you hadn't slept for 48 hours.
And it was always, I can remember every report was last minute. It was always last minute. So you write a report, and that goes back to the Mount Everest Foundation and the BMC. So you can access those reports whenever, and that's a good source of information if you're ever thinking about going somewhere. But quite often these new routes starts with a photo, and it might be a photo that you've seen in a magazine, an article, whatever. And the next two kind of world-class areas to document this is in the Alpine Journal, so the Alpine Club Journal, and the American Alpine Club Journal. That's like the ultimate place to find out. And they're published every year, and it'll document every new route and adventure that's been done around the world that year. So the American Alpine Club Journal and the Alpine Club Journal. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I'm not really a climber. I like walking up the mountains.
Yeah.
And I'm slightly mystified by your description of the different modes
Yeah.
of progress.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
The free climbing implies that there's nothing above you from which you're hanging.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
No, free climbing is a term that is just normal climbing. It's just that you're not pulling on gear that you've put into the mountain.
Yeah. But what you're doing, if you're going up these mountains, there must be nothing above you.
No.
Yeah.
No, so you're climbing. Yeah. So you're climbing for yourself. Nothing's pulling you up.
But then there's two different modes. One was much quicker than the other. I couldn't understand.
Yeah. Well, free climbing, because you're not having to find gear. And free climbing, you can only reach as far as you can to put a piece of gear in. So you're limited to the amount of movement by that distance. But normal climbing, you don't have to worry about that. And you only...
You got these basics. You can't do anything other than free climbing.
Yeah, you can put in gear, and it's called artificial climbing, where you actually pull on it. Whereas the other form of climbing is no gear, and you're just using it to hold on to. Yeah. And in Baffin, it was too cold to hold on to just the rock. It might have ice on it as well. Yeah, so it was harder. Yeah.
Were you bringing any of that gear back?
All of it came off the wall. Yeah. Some of it got left near the fjord. But all of it came off the wall, yeah. There were some ropes on Piney that we couldn't get down in that storm. But a good Slovenian friend of mine said to me, I'm sure the weather would get rid of those ropes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you too, Greg.
Yeah, somebody's asking, how long does Stuart take to acclimatise to reach 6,000 metres?
Yeah, well, that actual trip, I dabbled with a bit of Diamox for the first time and only time. And I stopped using the Diamox at base camp because I wanted to acclimatise properly. But honestly, I was just rattling with drugs. So everywhere was drugs. And you go for a preemptive strike if you get a headache or... but for that Himalayan trip, we were on there for 2 months. So we were there for 2 months. So it took about 3-4 weeks to get acclimatized, 3 weeks to get acclimatized to 6,000 meters. Yeah.
Any more questions? Yeah.
You talked a lot about your team and how it worked and how you leaned on each other. Do you come together naturally, or do you tend to like pick people out for certain expeditions? Like you need a serious one, a funny one.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know.
Yeah. No, it just happens naturally.
Yeah.
But I think you're aware of that. You know, you're aware of the dynamics.
Yeah.
And it's important there's people that you feel safe with, comfortable, and that you can have a good time. You can have a crack. Yeah, and I think that's really important. When you go into these places, you want to have a nice time as well. But we do kind of like, you know, there might be the two of you, then you might think about, oh, should we bring a third person? Who would be good for that? Who's free? Who's keen? Yeah, and you know, it's about how much they've done before as well. What can they bring to that experience? How can they contribute? Yeah, so
Have you ever had an experience where having that third person has upset the dynamic of the two because you've chosen wrongly? That might happen, might it?
So the questions are about team building and how to ensure you get good team cohesion.
No, we've always got on. Yeah, we've always got on.
At the end as
Yeah.
well as the beginning.
Yeah, we've had, there have been some moments, some tense moments, but more or less always got on.
Usually over chocolate, is it?
Yeah. I think one friend was really upset when we lost this bar tab from a bar in Alaska, and we drunk the bar dry of tequila. And the bar tab had the little 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And he wanted to keep that little post-it note because it was just covered of little, dashes. And unfortunately, I lost that because he was wanting to frame it at home. He was pretty upset when he lost that. But no. We all get on. I think also you make an effort when you're out there as well. Yeah, because there are certain things that you might not get on with, but you kind of retain that, you contain that, and then just because it's just not worth it, and it's more important to get on as a team. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll just ask the obligatory last question. I mean, do you have any expeditions in the offing or trips?
Yeah, not really. I've kind of slowed down a bit. So a lot of this was looking back.
Yeah.
And I'm really lucky to have done them. And but there was a stage when I was doing 2 expeditions a year, 1 year 3. Yeah. I was really quite lucky. Slowed down a bit now.
Were you sort of self-employed guide at the time? Because
No, I was working full time for Plasher Brennan, so they used to it was back in the day when you just took unpaid leave and thought about the consequences when you got back, You never really saved up for it. You were like, oh yeah, unpaid leave, great.
away you go.
Yeah. So no, I know, I'm not sure. I'm starting to get the itch, and I'd really like to get back on Fitzroy at some stage. Yeah, Fitzroy. Yeah.
Well, brilliant. If there's no more questions then, so thank you very much again. That was a superb evening and really stunning photographs that just reveal the kind of the on the edge climbing that you were doing. Amazing stuff. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
We're running out of beer.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Thank you.
And just before people go.